Hello everybody, this is the tutorial for how to build using the Flux Castle engine, or otherwise known as the OLT engine 2. I made a tutorial for these a while ago that went over how the engine worked back in the day, but in the last year or so I went through and changed a lot of how the engine works, and I need to walk people through what's changed, and I also kind of want to keep these videos as a backup in case I need to look back and see how it works. So I'm going to go through all the tools and how they work, but first what I need to kind of show off is how the engine works itself. What you might not know is that this is not necessarily a 3D environment. It is drawn as a 3D environment, but it is a 2D environment. Basically the way that this works is looking from above like this. We can imagine that, and this is my little paint job. Let's take a little circle. That represents the camera. This represents our screen. What we're going to do is we are going to imagine an environment that we have in front of us, kind of like this, and we're going to say that we want to draw it in 3D. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to present that this is like our screen. It's a line right now because it's just from the top-down perspective, but if you can imagine, and this is sort of like in its own separate section, right? So imagine that this is our screen, right? And what we can do instead of drawing literal 3D shapes is we can go, okay, divide the screen into pixel wide, like 1 pixel wide columns that go for every single pixel across the screen. Now for this, we're going to just do 4 because it would take a long time to draw them all, but for reference, when you do it in the game, the width of the game.width variable is how many of these stripes you're creating. I think by default it's 300. I might set that down to 150 because people's computers might not be able to take the 300 version. The canvas is 600 wide, but you can scale it properly. But what we need to know is that the number of pixels in the width is how many times it's doing this operation. So for this one, for the sake of demonstrating, we're going to do 4. So just like how we divided the screen here into pixel wide, 1 pixel wide vertical columns, we're going to divide this invisible sort of make-believe screen we have in our environment into 4 pieces. And from the camera, what we're going to do is we're going to project a ray. That ray will go to a point and then stop. And using that information, we're going to draw something on the screen. So from here, what we can do in our little imaginary environment here is we can say, okay, the ray went from here to here, and that was this far away, and that's for this pixel. So we go to that pixel and we go, okay, that was such and such amount far away. That means we draw the wall that it hit by making it a certain height. The farther the wall is away, the smaller that we make the wall. The closer it is, the bigger we make it. That's the start. So for each of these, we do a little drawing in the line. So we go, okay, well, from here to here, it's like a similar height. From here to here, it's closer. And from here to here, it's also closer, since we measure the distance to the plane instead of to the camera so that it doesn't get distorted. So what we do is we go, okay, well, this one's about the same height as this one, so we're going to make it look like that. And then for this one's closer, so we're going to make it look real close. We're going to make it bigger, right? The bigger that we make these little squares that we draw, these vertical lines of pixels, the more it'll look like it's close to you. So here we see that there's a square on the left and a square on the right, and there, this one's farther away and this one's closer. And when you look at it in first person, it'll look like this one's farther and this one's closer. Other things are calculated based on this. This is sort of the start, but it's how it works. After that, the game checks the floor and the ceiling and draws that, and then it also draws all the objects in the scene, which are 2-dimensional sprites, and I can show you one here. So this is a sprite. It's actually called an object in the game, but it is a 2-dimensional image that's being sort of placed in this 3D environment. This gets drawn over everything else. It doesn't really matter when you're building the engine, but just to keep in mind like how this sort of works. These are just 2D images that are projected in the scene based on where you're looking. But there are also a number of tools that are built in when you're in the DevTools mode. Now, I have DevTools on the left here. You see DevTools equals true on line This is 72 of this version, but I don't know if it'll be the same. Look for the game variable and you go into the DevTools part, you set that to true if it's not set to true. Okay, so first thing we want to do is hop into the, when we're using DevTools, is to hop into the camera that is used for level editing. The camera 2 that you can see in the top right there is used for first person. So when you set the camera to 2, you get put into first person. If you press the close bracket or open bracket key on your keyboard, you swap your camera. So here I've swapped it down to 0. If I press it again, it goes to 1. If I set it again, it goes to 2. So 0 is the one where you can edit things. Camera 1 is one where you can still move around and look and move using the arrow keys, but it's not very useful. 2 is the one that's first person. When you go to camera 0, what you'll notice is that there's a bunch of tools that are added to the top of the screen. These are useful because it allows you to actually build using the engine. You'll notice that the WSAD keys don't move the character in this one. They actually just move the camera. So you can keep your character in one place and then go around, edit the map. When you go back into first person mode, say you go over here, you're back here. So let me hop into a map that's a little easier to edit. Let's go to map 1. Let me show you how to do that actually. In the game variable, you have most of the information about the game. One of the important ones is the map variable. This sets you to the specific map that you've loaded. This variable corresponds to the map that is stored here in this giant chunk of code. See how there is a variable called maps. It is an array, and each of the indexes in that array are the maps that it is referring to. So if I was to put map equals 0 in, it would put us on this one called doors. This is one line of code. The next line of code is the next map, heights. So I'm in map 1, this is heights. And map 2 is editor test, which is like a blank map. So when we go to camera 0, we are given these tools. Each of the tools corresponds to some action that you can take to change the level. I went over a lot of these in the last one, but I've expanded them a lot. I think in the last version there was 6 tools, and now there's something like 23 or 24, so it's a little bit more complicated and it might take me a little while to get through all of them, but they're pretty intuitive once you get to using them, and I made the UI a lot nicer to use in case anybody wants to actually build something with this. It's not something that you have to know a lot about to really intuit what's going on. Okay, first thing I want to describe is the difference between walls, floors, and ceilings. They look very similar in the environment, but they do serve a different purpose than might be intuitive. The way that the level works, you can sort of imagine it as a sandwich, where the floor is one layer of bread and the ceiling is another layer of bread, and the walls are the sort of the stuff you put on the sandwich, like in between the pieces of bread. So in this case, what we can see is that here's a floor, here's a ceiling. The floors come out of the other floors behind them, and they can be seen as like little walls with platforms on top of them. The ceilings are the same, but they come from the ceiling. Walls, on the other hand, stretch from the floor to the ceiling, and they will always be defined that way. So what's interesting about these is that this is very fundamental to how the engine understands the level. So when you go into a floor, it always puts you on top or it stops you from going through. You actually can't go below the floor or above the ceiling without the game sort of glitching on you, and it is prevented because of that. So the way that the game understands itself is it looks at the floor and it goes, okay, this is where the drawing will start, and it draws based on that. So when you're building with these levels, you kind of have to understand it as if the floor and the ceiling are like hard constraints on the size of the level. So if you put a floor up to a certain level, you're not going to build anything underneath it. If you put the ceiling down to a certain level, you can't put anything above it. It makes the level into a sort of like, you can almost imagine it as like there is a shape to a top and a shape to a bottom, and everything else is inside of that. So the first and most important thing that I can show you how to change are these things called walls. This first tool, the walls tool, has this paintbrush one without anything next to it. This is the regular wall. The the way that you interact with the editor is by clicking and dragging to create things and change things when they're on the grid, and just clicking when they're not something that you can place in the grids. So walls are defined as objects within grid spaces. Each of these little squares is a grid space, and changing the value in the grid space changes the value of changes what the wall looks like there. So when we're editing with the tools available to us, this little number here and also up here is called the index. It's probably one of our most important concepts because it's what we use to define what it is, like how we're changing what we're working on, right? So by default it's at 0. That means that what you're replacing the grid space with, so when we click and drag, or click and drag, or just click once and release, we're replacing the value in there with 0. So here we have some that are 1. We're going to replace them with 0 instead. Here you can see that the wall is now gone. 0 when it comes to walls means that there is no wall there. Anything above 0 means that there is going to be a wall there. What the number determines is what texture the wall is. So we have a texture that's been labeled as texture number 1, basically. It's in the first index of the texture constants variable. I think that's what it's called. And that allows us to define what a wall looks like. So, for instance, here we have texture number 1. You can see it in the bottom left corner. It's sort of this gray color. Whenever we create a grid space that has a texture of 1, it creates this gray texture that takes with the space, right? When we go up 1, we go to 2. It's this weird bush texture, right? We click 2, we create a texture of 2 wall in this space. So we can see that there is a texture of 2 wall here. Alright, so that's how you place a wall. And a wall is actually very important because you can modify it in certain ways. Not with this tool, but with other tools. Now, that's actually a pretty simple tool, and I think that's about all we have to talk about for that one. What you'll notice is that there is this brush one, but there's also this brush one next to what looks like a little ledge that goes to the ground, and then there's another one that's like a ledge that goes to the ceiling. These are floor walls and these are ceiling walls. Floor and ceiling walls, while they sound like they are like walls, actually don't do very much. Basically, whenever the game draws a floor, what it does, or when it when it draws a change in the height of a floor, basically what it does is it creates a wall where the floor changed. Not a real wall, but just one that's drawn. Sort of the same way that the wall is drawn, but it's just there to be the texture that shows up between this level of floor and this level of floor. Every time you see a texture, or every time you see a floor increase in height in front of you, you have to have something that connects the one below it to the one above it, right? So we draw a wall there. It doesn't actually have the same properties as walls. For instance, you can change the texture of a wall so that it is transparent and vectors or rays cast by the camera can pass through it. That cannot be done with this since you cannot see underneath the floor. So these floors actually don't do anything aside from be like the decorative edge of the of the change in the floor height. Same with the ceiling changes. These are also here. As you can see, this is a texture 1 wall that's being drawn, although it doesn't do the same things as a wall, right? So that's what this tool changes. This is the tool for what's called a floor wall and the tool for what is called a ceiling wall. The main thing that I want to really stress with you is that these are not the same as the regular walls. These are actually just for show. The regular wall can have certain properties that are important for it. These ones just do not do anything except show between the two of them. So even though they're called a wall, they're not really as important as a wall. They're just for show. Here I can show you what they do. Like that before where you change the texture by changing the number, these always tend to have a texture. So since you want to connect the bottom of the floor to the top of the floor, all of these start with 1 by default. If you want the skybox to be there instead, you can set it to 0, but it kind of looks weird if you don't. So right now I've got it set to 1 by default. Let's say we wanted to change what the edge of that looked like. What we would do is we'd change the edge of the tile that, or we change the tile that's edge is being like displayed. So here we see that this is a box that's like the floor has changed here in this box. If we wanted the wall to be texture 2 instead, what we do is we change that to 2. And here it shows the texture of 2 instead of the texture of 1, which is useful if you want to, change the decorations. It doesn't change anything in how the level functions. That's the main thing I want to get across here. Okay. Same thing works for the ceiling wall tool. So the floor wall is the one on the left, the ceiling wall is the one on the right. I remember where the ceiling is here. It's, I think, here. So let's set this one to a 2 as well. We make the square, and the ceiling wall is changed. Kind of looks gross. This is not really what you would use this texture for, but it's just to demonstrate. It looks pretty freaky. Anyway, the last tool in our tool belt here, and this one is a doozy. This is the Shapes tool. So one of the big innovations that I made from the last engine, aside from the verticality, is that now objects or walls in the level, they don't have to be the same shape as the grid. Okay, so to better demonstrate, I have lowered the ceiling so it's a little easier to see what each wall looks like up close. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to create our first wall here. We are going to just make it a level 1 wall, like a texture 1 wall, and what we're going to do is change the number associated with the shape. So at 0 it is a rectangle like this, or a square. At 1, what we'll notice is that it is a diagonal. It's like a square with a diagonal cut out of it, right? And when you see it in game, this is what it looks like, right? It's very, very sharp. It's actually kind of looks skinny when you look at it from the side, but it's meant to fit into other squares. So like say you put one here and you put one here, you can see that it aligns with those two. Okay, so let's remove these. Okay, each of the shapes tends to have like the same shape a couple times afterwards to just rotate it. So this is the same shape but rotated in that direction. Each time you go up one, you're rotating it by like another quarter in the clockwise rotation. So those are the 4 diagonal cuts. There's a list of them at the top, but I don't know if they'll be available when this engine is finished. So the shapes here, we have full and we have a filled top left corner and then all the way to the bottom. Number 5 is the rounded top left corner. This is the same as the diagonal, but it's instead a circle. Sort of a rounded edge that connects the top and the bottom, with the radius being this, or the center of the circle being this corner here. Again, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are all the same, but they're just rotated. Let's see what the 9th one is. This one is just a full circle. So when you look at it, it looks like a circular post, right? It could be used for something like a column or like a cylindrical tank or something like that. I don't know. It'd be kind of cool. Now let's see what shape 10 is. Shape 10 is a thin wall. So here we can see that this is actually just a single pixel wide wall. Very, very sharp. You can use this to make something like this where, oops, start over. 11 is the same wall but rotated so that it's horizontal instead. 12 is that wall but bent. It's sort of a corner for those walls, right? You can use this for a lot of different things. You can use this to connect 2 of them, so like the vertical and the horizontal plug into this pretty well, but it can also be used as like a little post or just like a girder or something like that. It's easy to like incorporate into different things. It can also be like a corner for parts that don't really easily have a corner, since it's the corner of the grid. Again, like before, there's 4 of these, one for each corner that it sits in. Number 16, shape 16, is the same sort of thin wall, except instead of being on the middle of the grid, it is instead on the edge. There's 4 of these for each edge of the grid. Number 20, this is a half wall. Sort of a combination of the two. It is a half of a solid wall. It's oriented like this, and there are 4 of them, again rotating in that way. Finally, the last one is something similar to the old one. The last one we looked at, the thin wall version. There's a kind of like half wall version of the corner that connects the half walls that we built before. So let's say we had, this one might be a little confusing. Say we have the section like this, and we do it like this. There we go. This creates something like a corner within like this weird half wall shape. Alright, so that's all that is for the first wall tool. Next we can use the floor tool. The floor tool is kind of simple. It's very similar to the wall tool. First tab is the first tool is the, I think it's called layout technically, but think of it as the texture tool. What it does is it tells you what the floor's texture is. When there's nothing, you just see a solid color that represents the background. If we were to increase that to 1, and you can see in the bottom left corner a preview of what you're about to put down, you can see this is sort of like a garden tile, and when you look at it on the ground, it's drawn where the grid space is. And again, you can cycle through all the textures here and draw them all. So there's only 3, I believe, that I made for this map. Okay. Next, we have the shape tool. We'll get that in a minute. And here is where you would adjust the height of the floor. This first one is the one that you're probably going to use the most. You notice that there's 2 of them. One of them has a 1 next to it, one of them has a 2 next to it. This one is the primary, and this one is the secondary. So the way that this works is that most of the time what you're looking at when you look at a floor that's been raised is the primary height. So let's say we raise this one to 200, and we make an area that's all 200. We can see that we've created a floor that is 200 off the ground. What can be useful here is to notice that we are incrementing in hundreds when we use this tool. One thing I neglected to mention earlier is that along with this thing where you can click to raise and lower the number here, there is a number underneath it which is the step size that it takes. So here we can change that and it goes up in factors of 10. So we go up to 10, 100, 1,000, and we can even, then when we press these buttons, or we press the less than or greater than key on our keyboard, the number increases by the amount shown below. So it's easy to get bigger steps for the floor since there are a number of pixels off the ground instead of specific IDs that you're only going to be using the single digits for. So here we want the floor to be 200 off the ground. We press it twice with the 100 tool selected, right? That gives us our 200 tall wall or floor. So most of the time when you see a floor, you'll see it at its primary height. However, we can select this tool. This is called the shape, like the floor shape tool. It works similarly to how the wall does, where it takes the shape that's here and changes it. So at 0 by default, it is a square that is all the primary height. Let us change the secondary height to be 100 here. So it's a little off the ground, not as far off the ground as the primary. So when we go to our shape tool and we change it, we can now see that it has created a new shape, shaped floor. So here we see that the primary, which is 200, is in this top left corner, and it created a kind of diagonal, similar to how that how these walls start with a diagonal. This one starts with a diagonal, where the primary height, and let me put a texture on top of it so it's a little easier to see, so that the primary height here is the top left corner, and the secondary height is here. There are 2 of these. There's one, oops, I just put the character back at the start of the map. There's one that's that way, and there's one that's the other way, where the diagonal runs the opposite way across. Now, for the wall, you needed 4 different versions because the side that was filled in was like defined by the shape. Here, though, what's defined is a primary and a secondary side. So what you can do is, since there's only 2 of them, if you want one to be taller than the other, you just have to change which one is taller, the primary or the secondary. Whereas with the wall, one side was always filled in and one side was always empty. So there's actually only 4 floor shapes, and that's because I hated making them, and I didn't really see much use for making things like the rest of the wall sizes. I was originally going to put a few more in, but unless the game requires me to do that, I really don't want to mess with this anymore. It's a very complicated process to actually implement this floor shape thing. So 1 and 2, like I'll show you again. 1 and 2 are diagonal line cuts. So this top left corner here in the in 1, this top left corner is the primary, and this bottom corner is the secondary. It's a little buggy, you can tell. When you go to 2, it's the same. Top part is primary, bottom part is secondary, except the diagonal runs across the opposite side. So it goes from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. That way, when you're looking at it, you can change like which way the diagonal cuts, but remember, you don't need 4 different shapes for this because you can just change which one is on top and which one is on bottom. Okay. Next, we have shapes 3 and 4, which are the last two. 3 and 4 are just a straight straight cut in half version of the grid. With 3, we're looking at a vertical one that goes from the top to the bottom. It cuts, and for 4, we're looking at one that is horizontally cut from the left to the right. So you can tell that what you're looking at here is the top one. The higher one is the primary one. The lower one is the secondary. So when you make this, this is the primary. This one's the secondary. And when we go back, we can do that again. We'll make sure that we can show that this is when you use 3, the left one is the primary one and the right one is the secondary one. That's always the case. Okay, that's the floor. So the ceiling is identical. The ceiling is basically the exact same, except it does everything I just said on the ceiling. So here we made a texture and it goes on the ceiling. Very basic, same idea. You can make little shapes. Remember, when you're using the ceiling, and this is a no texture version, when you're using the ceiling to make shapes, or when you're using them before, remember that when you increase the number here for the height, it goes up off the floor. When you increase the height for the ceiling, it goes into the ceiling. So remember, if you want to make it look like it's coming out of the ceiling, you have to go down the number. So this is the texture that we put before, and now it's on top of this little thing. It's the same as before, and we can change the shape like before. We can actually, just real quick, maybe make this, here, let's actually just do it like this. Half the size or so, like that. And then we change the shape. Actually, change it to the 1. Okay, like before, boom, you get that weird situation, and it works the exact same. So, I'm not really going to explain that much more about it because it makes sense off the cuff. Next tool. The next tool is the lighting tool. This is an interesting one because when you change the lighting in a square, so let's say we make a square of slightly darker light here, it changes how things are lit in the square, right? So all the walls get darker, the floors get darker, and anything that's inside of that area that doesn't light itself becomes a little darker. So you can see these are kind of darker than these. And you can go from a value of 0 to 1. So it starts by 1 as default, which is the full brightness. And going all the way down to 0, you would make everything incredibly dark. So you can't see anything in there that's like completely dark. It looks strange, but when you look at it in a place where the gradients are fine, it can look pretty good. So let's start with 1, and I'll show you the gradient here. Let's go 0.9, 0.8, 0.7, 0.6, 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1, 0. This is the full gradient here, and you can change the step size so it can be even more refined. Remember that you can only go between 0 and 1 though, so that's the full gradient. And if I was to shoot, I don't think there's any projectiles that can shoot through that actually aren't lit. A projectile that is lit will change the lighting in an area. So this little zappy ball goes all the way, and it it changes the light that it's level of the area that it's in. When you don't have something that's lit like that, like these little gumball machine projectiles, they get darker. So you can go. Sorry if that's kind of loud. I'm working on the sound as we speak. Okay, so that's the lighting tool. This doesn't change unless you tell it to change. So it's not really that complicated. The first tool is this equal sign is like what the lighting is actually set to. Then we have the second tool. It's dynamic lighting. Dynamic lighting on its own doesn't do anything. It's just a way to define on the grid where you would like lighting to change based on something in the future. When you get into scripting the maps, you can just have a thing that checks every dynamic lighting and then have something that's like, if this trigger is on, turn this completely down to 0 or something like that. But for now, really all it is a flag. It doesn't change anything when you're actually building the level. As far as I can remember, I don't think I ever actually retained any of the functionality. Oh, no, I did. So this is back from the OLFT engine demo. There's a little map that has a light that flickers in the back. So since I set this to 1, it checks every tile that has that 1 on it, and it makes the light flicker on and off. So that's what dynamic lighting can do. It's mostly just something that you can script with. It doesn't do anything predictable. Okay. Next up, a very simple tool. Right now, it doesn't really do very much. I want to make it so that there's different categories of walls, but the basic thing that this does is the boundary tool. It tells you what you can and can't walk through. So you know how we built these walls earlier, this little section? We never told it that you can't walk through it. So you can actually just walk straight through these walls. To define a wall as something that you cannot walk through, you need to define it that way. So you need to give it a value of 1. That'll give it a little blue box. It looks like the blue box covers the whole wall, but it doesn't actually cover the whole wall. It actually automatically changes size based on the shape of the thing that you just put the wall around. So like this, you can see in the helpful top-down view, you can see that there's a little bounding box that prevents you from walking through walls that have these solid lines or solid blue colors on them. And they change to fit the shape that they are around. They're pretty accurate, although I think in some cases you could probably get the player to like wedge in certain ways that allows them to get through walls that they shouldn't. The main thing is just that these shapes have little boundaries around them, and if you change the shape of the wall, you can also change the shape of the boundary, so don't worry about doing that manually. They use the same value, the wall shape value. Okay. And that also is what defines whether you can shoot a wall. So since we set those to be solid, you can shoot them with a hit scan weapon and it'll actually work. Okay. Next. I'm trying to get through these kind of fast because otherwise this will be a really long video. Okay, this might be a little overwhelming to look at it first because it looks like we just got a bunch of extra tools on the bottom left and right of this. Do not worry, they're not that crazy. We'll get to them in a second. The main thing is that this is the section, this little question mark section, is the section that has all of the objects in them. So anything that draws a little sprite in the map, this is where this will be kept. Basically the way that the game works is it takes all of the things that could be rendered that way, so enemies, projectiles, particle effects, little pickup items, things called decoration, all of them are stored differently and they act differently. But since we want them to be drawn the same way, we don't actually draw based on where they are as just like, this is an enemy, this is a projectile. Otherwise you'd have to create a way to render each of those things where it checks, okay, for every enemy, draw an enemy. For every projectile, draw a projectile. Instead, what we do is we say, okay, start of the frame before we draw anything, find all of the things that create sprites and assign them what is called an object. The object is the sprite that's drawn in the level. So instead of having to go through and make sure that everything works and has the same and is ordered in a certain way, at the start of the level or at the start of the frame we go, what needs to be drawn, and then we draw it. And doing that we can actually cull things so that certain things aren't drawn if they can't be seen. So that's a long way to get to the idea that all of these things have objects in the sense that they use the object to be drawn. They are tools that are separate because they have different functionalities. Enemies can be shot, they can attack you, you can't walk through them. projectiles, they hit surfaces, they collide with the player, they do stuff, and things like pickups, the player can walk into them and pick them up. But they share the property that they're drawn using objects. So we categorize them together. Here we have the 3 different types that are in the game right now. We have enemies, we have pickups, and we have decorations. So decorations are the simplest one. They're probably the easiest to explain. Basically, we have a list of object constants. These are where the information about how an object should be drawn is stored. In the bottom left, you can see what it looks like, right? So this is our test object, and we can place it in the world as a sprite. This is just called decor because it's just decorations. So anytime you want to create something in the map that doesn't do anything but has that sprite attached to it, you can find the index of the object constant, the texture that you want to use, and you can cycle through them here to see what each of them looks like. And these are all the different ones in the game, not just any specific ones. It just goes through the whole list. And let's say I wanted to put this weird green and red test item. Let's put it here, right? Well, now you can see it's kind of stuck in the ground. Oh, sometimes they get a little buggy on the edge of stuff. Let me move over here. So let's place it here. And you can see it in the ground based on where I told it to go. This little tool in the bottom left corner is actually interactable. When you click on this, it changes where you are placing the object. So we click on the ceiling, it'll go on the ceiling, and here we can click on this one more time, and you get a value that you can change using the steps here. So since we set that to 10, it'll go up 10. So this will allow you to put this at 0 instead. And that puts it like sort of in the middle. You don't have to think too hard about that. But you know, if you want to manually set the height instead of just putting it on the ceiling or the floor. Okay, so the other ones that are a little more complicated are enemies and pickups. Again, what we can do is we can just click and say, here is where I want my enemy to be. And we're actually going to make it so that it starts. So now we've made an enemy called prop test. It's the index 0 enemy. What is important to note is that what you're doing here is you're creating an enemy of the type that you have selected as your index, right? So enemy 0 is this prop test. Enemy 1 is this thing called enemy test. They look the same. There's another one called, I think it's called like bat. And it's just a bat. I think it shares most of the code with the enemy test. And so what we've done is we've created one of each of these kinds of enemies that you've defined before. I need to change the weapon so it's not just a shotgun blast every time I click the screen. So here you can see each of the enemies that we put down. And one thing I should note about objects is that they are, while they are 2D images, what we've done is we allow you to, if you want to, define an object as an eight-sided object, right? So let's look at the bat here. What it does is, based on where the player is standing relative to it, it creates a different image when you're looking at it. That way you can kind of create the imaginary illusion that like an enemy has different shapes, or has different, like it looks like a three-dimensional object because you're able to look at it from different angles and see, oh, it's looking at me or it's looking to the left of me. That way you can create that. And I'll show you how to make different objects in a second. But you'll notice that you can't walk through enemies, and you can hit them with items like a sword or, you know, this thing, little laser gun. One thing that I should note is that there's a separate part that is drawn here when you click it, this little translucent circle. This is where the enemy is when it starts the level. Sort of in the level is stored as like a position, right? So what the game does is it's when it needs to spawn an enemy that is defined in the level, it spawns it here. And you can see where they are a little easier by seeing that. So if I was to restart the level, you can see that they've all been placed on those circles that were produced before. That way, when you're developing the level, you don't get mixed up and think that the enemies that have moved are going to be spawned on different parts. Also, if they haven't been spawned yet, it can be useful to see where they are. But I'll get to that in a second. The next thing you can do with enemies is you can delete them. So this delete button here is a toggle. When you click, normally it places an enemy, right? When you click with the delete thing down, it turns into a grid thing again. To delete things, you can drag over them and that creates a little box where everything inside of it is deleted. That deletes them from the map data as well, not just deleting the ones that are walking around at the moment. So if I was to reload the level by pressing the right bracket key or the close bracket key, you'll notice they aren't there anymore, even though before, when I reset the level, they were. Okay, so the next tool in this one, in the little left side here that you can use to affect the enemy conditions, is this start button. It's a question mark because it's asking whether an enemy is like spawned at the start of the level. If you uncheck this box and you place an enemy, what it does is it waits for something to tell it to be spawned. And I'll get into that in a minute, but what you can do is sort of like create something like an encounter or have enemies populate a level after you do something in another part of the level. So as you can see, I can see that there is supposed to be an enemy there, or there will be one spawned there, but there's nothing here. If the condition that spawned the enemy was to be triggered, then it would spawn. Speaking of that, we can now, and remember, you can see in the top right these values. So start is true, means that something will be spawned at the start of the level. Start is false, means something won't be, and that's sort of shown here. So here you can see these two little buttons next to each other for the exclamation point and the question mark. Exclamation points in this game tend to mean triggers. That means it's something that is done when a trigger is activated. So here you can see one in the top right. It says spawn trigger and condition. Spawn trigger is the trigger that has to be activated for the enemy to spawn, if it hasn't been spawned already. So if I was to set the spawn trigger to 1 and then place an enemy, it would not spawn until we activated trigger 1. Actually, right now it's at trigger 0. Oh, I forgot. You can only set it to a trigger that exists, and we haven't created any triggers. We'll get more into triggers later, but just know that when we set the spawn trigger, the top one, that means what trigger has to be activated for the enemy to spawn. The one below it is the condition. So when we make triggers in the level, what we can do is we can make them be conditional on an enemy dying. So say you had an encounter in a room and an enemy shows up, and then once you kill the enemy, you want it to do things like open doors, something like that. That is what this condition statement is for. So if there's a trigger that you want to be activated by the enemy dying, you change this little question mark to that trigger. So say you wanted trigger 1 to be activated, you would click the question mark button until you saw this condition go to 1. We can't do that yet because we haven't built any triggers, so we will get into that in a second. Fortunately for us, we don't actually have to spend that much time on the next tool because we're basically done with this one. At the moment, this doesn't do anything, but I want it to. This should do the thing where it places them at the height that you specify here in the bottom, but it doesn't do that yet, so I can't show you that. This second tool is the pickup tool. Pickups are like enemies, except they don't act like enemies. Pickups are just objects in the world that you can pick up. Gives the player ammo based on what the type is. So remember, we go through the types here. These are all the different ones, and you can see the names of them in the top right. We define them in the pickup constants menu. So when you place a pickup, it's the same as the other ones. Start lets it start at the start. Delete lets you delete them. Stuff like that. Very simple. Triggers, conditions, same thing. Triggers, spawn trigger changes what causes it to spawn. Condition trigger changes what condition is affected, like what trigger is affected by you picking it up. Instead of killing an enemy, this is picking up the pickup. So if say you have like a real tempting like suit of armor in the middle of the room, and you want it to trigger a trap when the player picks it up, you would change this trigger to be condition in the top right here. I'm pointing with my finger. Condition in the top right here, you would change it to be the trigger that you wanted to activate. And the thing to note about the enemies and the pickups, every enemy and every pickup that has that condition has to be killed or picked up for the trigger to start. I'll go into that in a minute. But we already went over decor, and now we will go into the next tool. Now it's time to explain the trigger tool. So this is the one after the objects tool, this exclamation point. Remember that the exclamation point tends to mean a trigger. Okay, so basically, as I mentioned before in the enemies section, certain things can be activated based on actions that the player has taken in the game. So stepping on a certain place, picking up an item, killing an enemy, these can all trigger events to happen. Things like doors opening, enemies spawning, pickup spawning, floors moving up and down, or even stuff like dynamic lighting if you were to script it that way. So what we can do is we can create triggers, right, on this tool. So you'll notice nothing's on the screen right now. What we can do is we can say create a new trigger or remove a trigger with these two buttons at the bottom left. The plus sign creates a new trigger. So let's create a new trigger. Now, one warning. Do not use this first trigger that's created here. This is trigger 0, right? Don't use it. It's not really that useful. You can use it. It'll do stuff, but certain things don't really work well. Like tiles don't get by default tiles are 0. Certain things don't check for the 0th trigger. All right, so don't use it. Go to the first trigger, trigger 1. Okay, so now we have trigger 1. What you've noticed is things have appeared at the bottom of the screen. And you might think that you're on trigger 1 right now, like I just did, but you're not actually on trigger 1. Unlike everything else, triggers are edited by pressing these buttons in the editor. The ones that's being edited, the one that is like the trigger that is being edited is defined by this index. Like as before, it would define what you place in the map. Since you're not really placing anything in the map for the triggers, what this does is it shows you which trigger you're editing. So we're on the 0th trigger right now. That's the one that we don't want to use. Let's go to the first trigger, and it only lets you go to the ones that exist. So do that after you create the trigger. We're on trigger 1 now. These 5 buttons tell the trigger what to look for when it's checking to see if it should be activated. All of the things that you set here have to be true if the trigger is going to activate. So, for example, from left to right, this is the tile trigger, this is the key trigger, this is the enemy trigger, this is the pickup trigger, and this is the trigger trigger. I call it the trigger lock because it's a little easier to remember that way. So, for example, let's say we wanted it to make it so that the player walks over a tile, and that activates something that is defined as being activated by trigger 1. So we're in trigger 1 right now. We have a tile button. We click the tile button. That gives us a little thing here that says 0:false. This is the thing that you defined, and this is the state that it's in at the moment, right? So 0 is, and it's from left to right, 0 is the tile, 1 is the key, etc. 2 is the enemy. So 0 is false means that the player has not stepped on tiles that were defined as setting off this trigger. To set where those tiles are, this is actually the only way you can interact with the map in this mode. We just drag with the trigger that it's tied to. So if we had trigger 1, it creates trigger 1 tiles. If we had a trigger 2, let's create a trigger 2. We go to trigger 2, we can, boom, trigger 2 tiles, right? So now we switch to the other camera and we can see, look in the top left here, trigger 0, or trigger 1 I mean, it has a 0 condition, which means that it waits for tiles to be stepped on before it says, okay, you're good to go. Or, you know, it sets itself to true. So when we step on them, it goes to true. And this is like this is like a set of conditions that have to be true for the trigger to activate. So let's say we had we wanted to make it so that the player also picked something up before it set this off, right? So right now there's no pickups that are saying condition 1, right? So it thinks that it's true right now because there's no condition, there's no pickups that that haven't been picked up yet. So let's create a pickup and we'll change it to condition 1, like that, right? When the player picks this up, hold on, oops, oh, that's an enemy. I just realized I just made an enemy. This is condition 1. I keep putting my fingers in the wrong spot. Okay, so since this one has the condition of 1, you will notice that when we go back to the trigger section, this 3 is false now, because there is a pickup that has the condition of 1 that has not been picked up yet. Now if we come in and pick it up, actually don't know if we can pick this one up. Maybe we have to lose some health. Hold on. We're gonna hurt ourselves with an explosion. Ow, my ears. Okay. So you notice in the top left, see there's a tool there that says false, right? Because this thing exists. Once we pick it up, it sets to true. Now that's the case for all. Oops. Now when it comes to pickups and enemies, that's not asking if any that have been labeled 1 have been picked up. It's checking to see if all of them have. So it's useful for when you have like an enemy encounter, you just set all of the enemies to be condition whatever that's then used to open a door. So then you have to kill all the enemies to open the door. With conditions on pickups, everything that is that pickup has to be picked up. The difference is when you have something like the tile and the key, once you step on the tile, that's always set to true, and once you pick up the key that is tied to that trigger, you always have that set to true. So if you have 2 keys in a level, if you pick up one of the keys that's labeled to be that trigger, it doesn't matter if the other one hasn't been picked up, that trigger is going to activate. Now the last one's the most complicated. These are already kind of complicated, but this is probably where it gets a little strange. So let's go to trigger 2, and we're going to click this trigger lock one, this last one. This is defining the condition to be based on whether another trigger has been activated. So for this one, let's say the trigger has to be trigger 1, right? The one that we just made before, right? We set this one to be 1, this little section above the buttons there, and we press plus. That adds it to the list of triggers that have to be true before this trigger is activated. Since trigger 1 is already activated, it will show up as true. What is notable about this, and I cannot stress this enough, is that this specific trigger is the only one that acts this way, the specific trigger condition. If this trigger condition is not met, if there are triggers, if say trigger 1 was false, none of the other things that you can set based on this will change. Now that doesn't usually matter when it comes to like enemies and pickups, since those are always checked. If an enemy appears that has a certain condition, it sets itself to false. But when you step on a tile, it's always true. So that means that you have to be careful when you make this, because if you have a section with a key, the key can only be picked up once, and that's the thing that sets off that trigger. So if you have a section that can be locked out with this condition, making a key that can be picked up and then the trigger is activated would prevent it from actually activating. So you have to be careful. But this is actually very useful as a tool, because you can have something like a room where let's say you want it to be so that after a player triggers another trigger, walking back through that room causes something to happen once they do, instead of, you know, happening the second that they activate the prerequisite trigger. So let's say you have like let's just reset these. Let's say we create a new trigger that's I don't know, like at the end of this hallway, right? Oops, meant to do this. Remember not to use the 0th trigger. We go to the first trigger, we set this, we go, okay, boom. There's a trigger at the end of this hallway that's going to be set off, right? Now let's say we have another trigger that we want to only go off after you've set this off. So like you go down this room, you don't want it to be, let's say like, let's say our goal is, oops, let's say our goal is to have some kind of like a jump scare encounter when you leave this room. Now normally stepping on this tile would prevent you, would make it so that the condition goes off when you're going into this room, but you don't want it to happen, so you want it to wait until you come back out. So let's say we put that step trigger there, and then we say lock until this first trigger is activated, trigger 1, right? So we add the trigger 1 to this, right? So let's go back in, and I'm sorry about the noise, Jesus, that was, whew. Okay, so here is the passageway that we created, right? Normally, this step trigger would activate when we walk in. You'll notice it doesn't activate at all when we step on it. Only once trigger 1 is activated, you can see that the conditional trigger, number 4, this one, has activated. And look, when we go back through, now it activates. So it prevents you from activating stuff early. It would be good if you had like a room where walking into it one way isn't supposed to set off a trigger, but walking out of it sets off a separate trigger that, ambushes you when you kind of least expect it. Kind of a niche tech, but remember that you can add as many triggers as you want, so you can have a little bit of Boolean logic, sort of, where multiple triggers have to be true at the same time for another one to be activatable, right? So I'll show you what you can do with that in a second. Let me real quick hop into this map. Map 0. Map 0 is the one that I use to test this sort of thing, so there's all sorts of weird stuff that happens, but ignore for a second how these doors work. I will teach you in a second. Okay, so we've stepped into this room, and now that's triggered these enemies to spawn, okay? But this door is locked. We want to unlock it by killing all of the enemies. So enemies all die. Once they all die, the door opens, right? Okay, now let's check this room. Okay, item that we can pick up at the end of the room. When you turn around, that spawned enemies, and this door is still locked. Okay, so we kill the enemies. The door is still locked. It requires one other thing to activate. Let's go upstairs. This is, I think, the key that we need. It's a key. And by grabbing the key, we see that we've opened the door. So only by killing those enemies and picking up the key were we able to unlock the door. Stepping onto this tile opens this door. And you can do some really cool set pieces with this. Like you can have a floor raise when you step on a tile here. And you can have separate things that get raised separately, like this. By restarting the level, you can reset all of the triggers. So what you'll notice is when you open this trigger menu, this is done using a bunch of triggers. So stepping on this floor allows you to open this door. Stepping on these tiles spawns the enemies, and killing the enemies opens this door. It's a bunch of triggers are responsible for the logic of what happens in the level. That's something you can do with the trigger logic. Oops. Okay, so we are almost done with all of the tools, and I think that should be almost the entire video. What is up next is a little bit complicated. So when you have a wall, it is drawn based on the shape of the wall. And let's make it a boundary too, so that we can make sure that we don't walk through it when we change things about it, right? That is ignored if the wall is a door. And the wall then takes on the shape of a door and opens and closes based on triggers. So, what is a door? Well, here we have the door tool. It has the door, and then this first tool is the actual door tool. Okay, so we can create a new door by clicking this Add New button, right? This one underneath the Door Open button. By creating a new door, what we do is we create another door in like an array of kinds of doors. The index shows which door we are modifying and which door we are placing down. right? So here we are on door 0. Even though we created one, you can't see one. That's because door 0 is like off limits. You can't use door 0 since doors are defined by the grid space that they're on, and 0 indicates that there's no door. So let's go on to the next one, door 1, right? Whoa, shoot, this whole thing just popped up on the side. There's a lot of tools. Actually, let's go to somewhere where you can see them a little better. That's a ton of tools. What do they all mean? They're all pretty self-explanatory, and from top to bottom, you get a kind of understanding of how the door works. Let's not mess with anything here. Let's make it so that this is triggered by, let's create a trigger. Trigger 1, and we'll make the trigger activate when you step on the floor over here, right? Oops. Oh, oops. I did the thing again. Okay. So let's create a trigger. Trigger 1, and it's set off by that. Okay, let's forget all of these tools right now. These define what the door does. We're going to set it to be activated by trigger 1, and we're going to set this tile to be a door 1. So here we have defined what a door 1 is, and this is defining this square as being a door 1, right? That little number on the bottom is something called door open, and I will get to that in a second. Let's set off this trigger that is responsible for this door. Oh, look, you can't see the door because it has been created open. Let's instead do that. Okay, sorry about that. So now we have a door. It's actually not drawn like the wall that was there before. Instead, it is drawn like a half wall because that's the kind of door that it is by default. Okay, now let's activate the door. Oh, look, it opens when we activate it, right? So basically what we're doing when we add a door is we're saying, okay, here is a tile that should act like a door that is like this. So all of these things are what a door 1 is. Since it's activated at trigger 1, it activated and opened because trigger 1 was activated. Any door that has the same trigger will be activated like that. Some doors can be opened by the players, so they're not always the same. They're not always open the same, and every floor tile can be defined as having different door open values. So they can be open a different amount. Each door is independent, but this is sort of defining what kind of door it is, like how it acts, what it looks like, whether the player can interact with it. So let's go down the list of what these are. From the top, type defines the sort of shape and way that the door moves, right? And that's coupled with this button left or right that tells it which way it moves. So let's say that the door opens to the right instead, right? When we go in and we set the door up here, instead it'll now open to the right, where before it opened to the left, right? So that just tells it which way it swings. Let's say we use a door 1. A door of a type 1. So use these arrows to cycle through the different types, right? So this is a different type of door. It's the same door, but vertical instead. And when we open it, it slides open. I will go through each of these and try to remember what they were, because I didn't really write this down. I don't know if I did up at the top. No, I did not. So let's make a cooler looking door, and let's also define it here as a, oops, not a door, not a trigger 1, but as a door 1. So you'll notice when we go for this, it opens that way. Okay. Increasing the type then makes it a different type of door. So this is type 2, which is it's like a solid block that acts like a door on all sides, which allows you to sort of hide doors in walls without having to like make a separate type for every single side of the wall. You can just have it look like the wall opens up, right? Very simple. The next type of door Type 3. This is the first swinging door. When we, hold on, let me set down a trigger point for these things to set off real quick. When you open it, it swings open. The various ones after this, I think it's 3, 4, 5, and 6, are just the 4 different sides of that like square. So the door is on the bottom side, and then I think it's on the top side, and then the left side, and then the right side. You'd have to check on your own because I don't really feel like going through each of those right now since it takes a little bit to reset them. And remember, by switching which way it opens, you switch which way it swings. So it'll go from the right to the left, or it'll go from the left to the right. Now, this next option is player. It's a toggle, and it changes whether the player is able to open the door. Basically what this does is when we go hop in, you'll notice that before what would happen is, see this door not activated. It doesn't activate when we step on this thing, but when we walk up to the door and we press E, oh sorry, I need to make this a solid block for it to be able to register that the player hit it. Okay, so when the player walks up and presses E, it opens the door. That is, I think it stays open for about 10 seconds and then it closes again when the player is the one who has to open the door. So see it close again, right? And these doors, they have the proper collision, so you can't walk through them when they're in the proper state. So the last thing that is relevant to the player thing is that I believe, yeah, you have to set the door to have a hitbox. You have to tell it to have collision, or else it won't go. So it won't go when the player presses on it, because it won't be detected by the hit scan function. So what happens when you press E is you shoot a little hit scan out, and it measures if you've hit a wall that's within your like range with the hit scan, and then it activates based on that. So what is next? Okay, these tools at the bottom define like the maximum and minimum of where the door can start and end. So let's go to a type 0 door, right? This one. When the player can activate it. Sorry, when the player can activate it. What is going on? Maximum 0. Oh, okay. That's my mistake. So one thing to be careful about is that the maximum and minimum tell whether the door can move or not. Basically, when the door is outside of its maximum and minimum, it won't move. So here we can instead set the minimum to be a little tighter to the wall, right? So the max and the min are affected by this little step function here. Not the step function, but like the step number, like the step size. The one underneath the index, right? When we walk up to the door and we press E on it, it now only opens to that size. And it'll eventually close and be the right size, I believe. I don't know if it does, actually. I think that might be bugged, but it should work so that the door is set so that it recloses, but I guess not when it's 0.7. It might be outside of its max now. Yeah, I think it didn't get set to its max or minimum. Anyway, that's what the minimum does. It affects how far the door opens. The speed changes how quickly the door moves from left to right or right to left. And direction shows in the direction the door will move when it's going. So direction is either 1 or -1. If the door is set to be 1 when it's placed and you set the direction to -1, it will go to 0. If the door is set to 0 and you set the direction to be 1, the door will open to, or will go up to 1, right? The trigger is the trigger that allows the door to open. If the player does not open the door, if it's not one that's defined as player here, then that will immediately open the door. If the player is defined, if player is set to true, instead what will happen is it'll allow the player to open the door. This door open variable doesn't affect the door that you are working with, like all of them. It instead affects the ones that you place. So let me create a door real quick. Okay, so let us create a door of type 1. This one will be at 0. This one will be at 1. Or oops, let's go down to a smaller step size. This variable is changed at the rate that this is set to. So let's set this as door open 0.1 and then door open 0.2. Unfortunately, we've set this so that they're going the wrong way. And the trigger is always on. I just realized. So let's set the trigger to be 1, and let's change trigger 1 to be something that hasn't actually been. Oh, I just realized. Take that off. Go to trigger 1, set trigger 1 to be here, right? Now let's go and we'll check. Let's go 0. Oops. 0.1 and then 0.2. Those should be, so you'll see the direction is 1, the trigger door open is 1. When we set the trigger off, they all activate, right? But what happens is that they are all separate sizes. This door open defines the one that you place when you click. It doesn't define them all. These tools to the left of door open are affecting all of them because it just defines how that door would work. And it keeps them safe in a separate variable. So no matter what, when you click on put down a door 1, it's going to have these attributes. It's going to be a type 0 door, it's going to go left or right, it's going to have the player, it's going to be max, minimum, speed, whatever. All this stuff. But once you click door open, if you can change that between the doors. One last thing about doors is that the the interesting thing about doors is that they're not all literally like doors that open and close like walls. They are actually how you do raising and lowering platforms, which is an important part of the toolkit that you have as a level designer. One of the most important things about doors is that they actually don't just define walls that act like doors. They can instead change the height of the floor and the ceiling. So type 7 and 8 are both the two types that define like moving ceilings and floors. Type 7 is moving floors and type 8 is moving ceilings. So let's say we create a we have a trigger set up right now that is set to some floor tiles. I don't know if I've set them yet. No, I have not. So let's say we create a set of floor tiles like around here. I'll try to remember where those are. Let's actually put a little wall here so we can tell that that's where that starts. We go to the doors, we set a type 7, and we tell it based on left or right. We change so the thing that the left or right function does in this case, since it's not a door that swings left or right, it instead tells it whether to raise the primary or the secondary height. So you can have shaped walls that move, and you can have all sorts of different like shapes that kind of like come up and then form a regular floor. Primary, secondary, primary, and secondary. So P is primary, S is secondary, PS is primary and secondary. Let's set, and one last thing before we create it, the value for maximum and minimum are the values that they like raise to. So if you have a floor and it's at a height of if you want it to go to a height of 100, you set max to be like 100. Oops. Oh crap. There we go. So let's set this to 100 or 200. Actually, let's go all the way to 400, right? And then we create a floor here. We're going to create it with a direction of 1 since we want it to go up to 100. and we're going to have it be triggered by trigger 1. Okay, so we'll see this, and we know that the trigger is set up here, so let's go walk over to that trigger. Let's set it up, and you'll see it raising. Problem is we didn't really make the speed very fast, so let's go down to 0.1, and we'll change this to be, actually let's go back up to 1. We'll change this to be like 1.1. And you can see it raises, and it acts like a regular floor, so it's just changing what the actual value of the floor is at that spot. And you can tell it goes all the way up until it's at the maximum height that you defined. So that's how you do that. It's the same for ceilings. You can change it to be a ceiling changing one. And actually, we will have to increase the value there because it has to be in between the maximum and the minimum to work. So let's try that again, and you will notice it now goes into the ceiling because it has been told to go up. If you wanted to change the direction, you would click this button and it would start going down. So that's actually very useful, and it's inside. You have to remember it's inside the doors. Okay. In the doors section, I added a couple of other tools that are somewhat useful. So this little one next to the door icon with the A to B is a teleporter. So what you can do is you can create a new teleporter by pressing this little plus button, right? That creates a teleporter, and by default, both the start and the end of the teleporter are in the left-hand side there. These are seamless teleporters. When you click start, and when you click this button, you switch between whether you're editing the start and the end. It's very simple. You just select the area. This is the start. It's green. And then you swap to the other end, which is where you want it to go. And you make it like that, right? So that's the start and the end of the teleporter, right? Very simple. When you step on this green square, it will teleport you to that red square. Now, these are seamless teleporters. They don't show anything on the screen when you do it, and by walking into them, it sort of keeps your position contingent or like the same. So let's say we change the start to be just like 2 squares like this, and we make the end 2 squares like this. What I mean by continuous is that it keeps your like horizontal position. Oops, I keep walking into the teleporter. It keeps your like vertical position as you walk through it. So like that. Notice that the ceiling has now gone all the way down to the ground. This can be useful since it's a little easier to see if you do it like this. The position stays the same as you walk through it, so it can really be seamless in some sections. So the way that it does this is it takes the sort of like the percent of the way you are in each of the directions. So like say I'm like halfway down this green box, it puts me halfway down this red box. So even if this is like this long, it'll still place me at that relative position. Hold on, let me actually do it through here so it's a little easier to tell what's going on. It puts me halfway down the red box. If I go near the top, it goes to the top. Oh shoot, I keep walking through the teleporter. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, it goes all the way down to the bottom. Which is mostly useful if it's the same, like if the teleporters are the same size, it puts you in the exact same position. Now let me show you where that can be useful, because in some cases, they can be used to trick the player. So this is a stairwell, and when you walk up it, you go into this room, and when you walk down it, you go into this room. The thing about this is that you can't actually put a room on top of another room like this, right? The way that it's done is by creating 2 rooms, one that's here, and one that's here, right? When the player walks through this hallway, the teleporter moves them into the room below, and that allows them to look as if they're going between the same rooms, but since the teleporter is seamless, you can't tell that you've been teleported between the two different spots. Isn't that neat? And you can do all sorts of tricks with this, like there's another section. Okay, so you can notice that you can create illusions like this, where it looks like you're running in circles around the same place, when in reality you're actually being corralled into two little containers that then allow you to go back out the way you came. So it looks like, hold on, I didn't actually show how it looks. You can create the illusion that you're going around in circles, only to come back out the same way that you came in. And that's done with teleporters, because if we go to the teleporters, you can see that you cross over a line here and get sent to this one, which sends you down the same path so that you can't go back to the old teleporter unless you go backwards, and it sends you back. There is one other tool in the doors section. It's very simple. It's called a level exit, or like level select. You create one like you do the other things. You tell it which level you want to get sent to. You put it down. It's tied to the index. It's the exact same as the teleporter, except there's only one of them. You tell it the level that you want to go to. You tell it whether or not you have a special starting and finishing position. You can tell it specific things, like where you want to start in the map specifically. Using these buttons, you can change where that is. Setting to false spawns you at the place you would spawn by default in that level. And so walking into it takes you to the next level. That's how you would make it so that each levels are connected, and you can also define what level you want to go to. So you could have multiple exits for a level. You could make a sort of seamless world where like levels just kind of take you to different levels that blend together. And having the separate starting positions allows you to make it so that there's more than one way to enter into a level. So you'd have like a default way, and then you'd have a second one that's able to like place you somewhere else since you entered the level in a different place. One last tool to go over, and it's actually two tools, but they're basically the same. So one of the ways that we can save processing power, and I'll go over a little bit how to save processing power in a minute. One of the most strenuous things for the computer to check is every single time that it casts a ray, and when you've got the pixel set to 300, that means that it's doing this 300 times. It checks to see if any of the objects that are in view, any of the sprites that are in view, can be seen, and then it goes and it draws those. You don't want to do that if you don't have to, if there's a lot of sprites. So one way that I've made it so that you can cut it down is if you have a big scene like this, and it's sectioned off into different parts, what you can do is make it so that only objects in a certain area can be drawn if you're in that area. How does that work? Basically, you have a grid of numbers here, and if the player and the object are standing on the same number, then the player will draw the object. If not, it won't. The reason that there's two tools is because there's two grids. Okay, so let's say that we're in an area right here, and we want it to be so that when we're in the top half of this area, these things are drawn, and when we're in the bottom half of this area, they aren't. What you want to do is set the tiles so that the player does not stand on the same tile in either of the grids as the tiles in either grids that the objects are being drawn in. So here we have three objects. We're going to set one side of this box to be ones instead of zeros, and we're going to set the other side, this side as well, to be ones instead of zeros. Did I do that right? Okay. So right now we're standing in the one section. That means we can't see these objects. If we move to the zero section, we can see them, right? And that allows us to section off certain parts of the map so that only the objects that are relevant to that part of the map get drawn. Now the reason there's two grids is so that you can set an exception, right? So in some places you want to be able to see both, both the one and the other at the same time, or just to make it so there's a transition so you could be able to see them as you like walk through a hallway, right? So say you've got a little hallway here and you want to be able to see the objects as you pass into this other section, but not from the other section. So say here we have the sorry, the 0 section at the top and the 1 section at the bottom. For the secondary, you set the same thing, but in this section, you create a little bit of an overlap. You say that this should be 0 as well. That way, when you're in this little hallway, you can still see them. It's only once you move out of it that you can't. And that way, when in this hallway, there's say there's more objects down here, right? These guys, you want to be able to see them here. If this hallway was not marked with both of them, oops. If this hallway was not marked with both 0 and 1, you'd be able to only see one side of this in each of them. But since it's marked with both 0 and 1, you can see all of them. Since the hallway tends to restrict your view, it's not going to be as resource intensive, and it allows you to do stuff where you can section stuff off like that so they can't be seen inside the box, but when you're in here you can see both this one and this one. So it'll be useful to have these sectioned off from the other ones. But say I'm walking in this hallway between the two sections and I want to look into this room. All of a sudden it seems like this one's disappeared and I can see stuff in this hallway. But when I walk out into this area, I can't see, or when I'm in the hallway, I can see these guys, but I can't see these guys. One way to solve this problem is to use this secondary tool to overlap the tiles that you're on. And it lets you create little hallways like this where you can see, while you're in the hallway, one of the groups, and then you can look out and see the other group. That way when you're inside this, oh man, I can't see the other side, I don't need to worry about it, but when I'm in the hallway I need to see both. That way I can see this one, I can see that one. I go out here, I can see them. Meanwhile, when I'm in the actual area where I can see a lot of them, oh man, I can't see anything over there, and it never draws them even though they're in my view. Like I can still look at them. They're never actually checked to be seen if they're drawn. It's a very useful tool. And that's the last tool that I have to talk about. Anything else that I need to mention? Just go over the controls one more time. Open bracket to change the camera. Close bracket to reset the level. Oh, and how to save. The P key toggles the grid lines. The O key toggles semi-pause. I'll just go get that from the other one. Okay, the last thing that I need to teach is saving. So we have this map and we want to save it, and you should probably save pretty regularly. To save the map, you press the slash key with the question mark on it, and it prints out this monster amount of data, right? What you do is you take this, copy it like this, so from the bottom right to the top left, and you make sure you don't get this X in there or else it'll kind of create a little weird text there. Control C and go down to maps. I believe it is down here, and you will go down to the bottom of this line. So see this big chunk of text is just one line of code, 2702. Go down to the bottom of 2702, scroll all the way up to the top, and you can replace that one with that one. That saves it, as long as you save the code. Remember, you cannot save the program and have what's going on in it be saved. You have to take the information out by printing it out, and then you go through and you copy and paste it into the code so that it actually gets saved. And you should probably copy and paste it somewhere else so that you don't have all this crap in the code. One thing to note, the code for this game, if you include the dev tools, is almost 700 it's like about 700 kilobytes. Khan Academy has a limit to saving programs. They have to be under 750 kilobytes. So if you try and save too many of these maps, they will like not allow you to save. So my recommendation would be develop the maps, save them somewhere else, and paste them in when you need to work on them. And you can work on them and save them. Make sure you only have like one or two in there at a time, especially if they're big maps like this one. Aside from that, I think that's everything. I will probably go back through and check if there's anything I missed. It's a bit of a complicated system, but hopefully this is useful, and I probably won't be the main person who uses this because I kind of got to go back and check my work sometimes. So I will edit in anything that I think needs to be said. Okay, so I forgot to mention a couple of things, so I came back while I was editing to point them out. Nothing really about how it works, the game works, just a couple tips that I wanted to mention when I first started making the video. So the main thing that I wanted to add was that, first of all, I don't think I really fully explained how this works. These tools in the bottom right are always here, so you can always use them the same way. You can click on them, and there's also keybinds that are tied to them. So one thing is I don't think there's keybinds for the step size, this bottom one. There are keybinds for this left and right ones. I mentioned it before, but it might not have been super clear. You can click these arrows and it steps it up by the same size as the step here. I just broke it. Oh well. If you try to have it draw something that's not like an actual texture, it will glitch the game out. I'll probably put a restriction on that by the time I really release all this stuff. But so you can use these little arrow buttons to click up and down, which is useful because sometimes you want to just design level with one hand and use your left hand to do the camera, and you can do them both at the same time, so it's pretty handy. But if you're using your hand, your left hand, you can also use the comma and period keys to go up and down pretty quick, and that tends to be what I do because that's how it's always worked before I programmed in this actual UI. So if you like to use keys, you can use those instead. There isn't one for the step size. That was added after, so I didn't bother to add keys for it because there's keys for all sorts of stuff. One thing that I completely forgot to mention, uh, these buttons above have the X plus and the Y plus label on them. What they do is the map is a specific size. The grid is a certain amount of blocks wide, like spaces wide, right? You do not want, you can't draw outside of that grid. It restricts you from doing that, and if you step outside of that grid, it will break the game at the moment. I'm gonna go see if I can fix that, but currently, do not let the player leave the grid. It will break the game. So, you can make the grid bigger by pressing these buttons. X plus moves it in the X direction, and Y plus moves it in the Y direction. And you can remember that like Khan Academy, the top left hand corner is where it starts. So adding in the X direction goes this way, adding in the Y direction goes down, kind of unintuitively. That's what increases the grid size. What else? Here's a very tangential one, but you can, in fact, lock the mouse. So when you're in this little view, sometimes it can be kind of hard to tell that you're like, so say you want it to look in a certain way. When you press escape to break out of this, it sometimes can like spaz, like it moves all of a sudden like really quick, um, just really fast, like spasm of like movement because your cursor comes out of the screen and goes back to where it was when you first had it out, which sometimes means that, like, say we had it up here and we're moving around like this. When we press escape, you go quickly to the top left because your cursor went from here to here in one frame. That can be bad if you're trying to look at something while you change code. So one thing you can do is if you press U, you can lock the mouse. I'm moving my mouse right now and it's not doing anything. I press escape, it's not doing anything. It won't move until I click on it again. So press the U key and that'll stop it from moving, and you can just change the code to all you like. Mostly it's something I use for graphics debugging, but I'm sure it can have some other uses. Next, I think I think I'll make a separate video about how to actually make the textures because it's a little late right now. Don't look at the clock. Uh, and then I'll probably make a video of myself making a map so I can kind of show off the process of working on something like that. But that should be it for this video. Thank you for watching.